My game of the day from round 4 of the London Chess Classic is Sergei Karjakin against Fabiano Caruana. This is a repeat of the famous last round of the Candidates Tournament in 2016, where these two met each other, exactly the same colours, and that was an unbelievable open Sicilian with Karjakin coming out on top. So what would happen in this one? Well, Caruana has played a different kind of Sicilian. It's a Taimanov. And he's ready to go into a favourite line of Karjakin's. Karjakin has played this, many moves possible here. You can transpose to a Scheveningen, possibly with bishop e2, f4 is possible. You can also play queen d2 and so on. a3 is possible. But Karjakin has played this very trendy move, queen f3, on 4 previous occasions, and he has 100% with this move. So Caruana is pretty brave going into this line, but obviously he's prepared something. So it looks slightly odd to play the queen to f3 at such an early stage, particularly when it's vulnerable to attack here. Normally one would advance the f-pawn first, but there's a very nice little idea to put the queen on g3. Let me show you this. So, for example, one of Karjakin's games went like this: exchange on d4, and now this move queen g3. This is the idea. So can't block with the bishop because g7 is on prise. To move the queen is a bit awkward, and after the exchange, well, this is just the kind of position Karjakin likes. His structure has improved because now there's a nice semi-open h-file for the rook. Very free development, simple development for white's pieces, nice structure. White is slightly better here. So that's one of the ideas behind this move, queen f3. But Caruana clearly has something prepared. He played very, very quickly, played all these moves just about instantly. Here h5 has been played previously, but b5 played quickly by Caruana. And now we see the other point, playing the queen out at such an early stage. White can castle queenside rapidly, and so that sharpens the game considerably. The rook coming into the game. Now the king can be slightly vulnerable on c1. Let's see how this one plays out. Knight f6. It is very provocative playing the knight out to e5 at such an early stage, because white can immediately drive it away with f4, and if the knight comes here, well, that can just be exchanged, or maybe even just e5 straight away. Very promising. But knight eg4 suddenly gets a bit tricky. So bishop g1 preserves the bishop, and now this knight is left somewhat stranded on g4. If black doesn't react quickly here, and if white is allowed to just drive this knight back to h6, then this is obviously tremendous for white. So black really needs to play precisely here in order to justify this outrageous maneuver with the knight, this adventure with the knight. So h5, right, what's the point of this? Well, this introduces the move h4, which can be very useful in some circumstances to push the queen. One crucial move here is h3. If the knight has to drop back, then white is fine, but it's very important that black has this move, b4. So if pawn takes knight, then black captures here, and then this is absolutely fine. All these pawns on prise, black is absolutely fine in this position. So after b4, the knight moves, then we can take on e4. Again, black is fine in this position. Very important variation. So there is a slight problem with this pawn, and black is ready to put even more pressure on with the bishop and push here. So e5 from Karjakin. Now, again, if this knight has to move backwards to a poor square, then white is doing extremely well. So b4 is just about forced. So pushing this knight away, and that means this knight finds a nice square on d5. And now that knight on e4 could potentially be vulnerable to attack with queen a5, maybe forcing b3 and then knight c3. So therefore knight b3 covers some squares here, maybe allows this knight to hop back in, and also introduces this possibility of actually sacrificing the exchange on d5 and throwing this knight into b6. So that's very logical. So bishop b7 covers that knight, so we can recapture the bishop. Also sometimes introduces the idea of bringing the rook to c8, put some pressure here. So knight c5 brings that stranded knight back into the middle, so should be a good thing to take that bishop, so the bishop moves. And now knight e4 comes back and starts to look at d6, maybe introduces this possibility of bishop to c5, exchanging off and getting the knight into d6. And this is a very important move, f5. So this continues to the policy of shaking up white's position, keeping white under pressure. And I think it's very important. Otherwise, it could be very difficult to justify, this errant knight at the side of the board. But f5 is a tremendous move. It doesn't. I don't think it gives black the advantage, but it sets white so many problems. I mean, one thing is, what happens if this pawn is taken en passant? Well, it means that black has managed to break down the centre, and suddenly this bishop could come into play on this diagonal. This pawn is also en prise, but this is not such a clear position, even so, because black's development isn't brilliant. So, for example, h3 may be possible. Then black can take here. Knight comes in. Well, I mean, this is such an unclear position. But I sort of understand why Karjakin was reluctant to do that, because it does give away his centre. He thought for 26 minutes here and came up with h3. The queen was pushed back. Karjakin clearly didn't want to go into an endgame, wanted to keep more tension. But after this forced exchange of pieces and then taking here, suddenly black breaks free. Now, this is still extremely unclear. Black may be a pawn up. However, king is in the middle. White's king is now a bit safer than black's, and white for the moment has a little bit of initiative. So I'm not surprised that Karjakin avoided an endgame to go for this. But the way Caruana dealt with this was very clever. First of all, knight g6, good move, pushing this queen away. So obviously Karjakin doesn't want an endgame. He's a pawn down. Queen h3, and now this is the point. Queen g5, check. And that just gives black a bit of breathing space. I mean, when I was looking at this position live, I was thinking a5 should be a decent move, just to try and keep the initiative going and put some pressure on white's king. But, well, Caruana thought for 17 minutes here and didn't do that. Instead, I think he played a very practical move, and I think this is a key move in the game, and not an easy one to spot. Bishop d5. Now, this doesn't seem as though it performs any great function, but one point is that actually it's now a long way from being attacked by that knight. So, and it just kind of cements the position together. If instead my move a5, once this bishop moves, then the knight might come in here, attacking the bishop, and then maybe come to the b5 square, for example. So bishop d5 is just a way of squashing white's counterplay, and now it's very, very difficult for white actually to find a decent plan. So if bishop e3, then the queen just comes to h4, and now white cannot avoid a trade of queens. So Karjakin played the bishop back to g1. but it doesn't really put any pressure on black's position. Bishop e7, simple move. He could simply be preparing to play the king here and the rook across, but I mean, it's just a very solid move. Also, maybe simply bishop f6. g3 from Karjakin. Maybe he wants to use this square here, but Caruana puts his finger on the problem with that move. This f3 square can now be used. And by this point, it's absolutely clear that the initiative has swung over to black. And you can see this central spine in the position just holds black's position together absolutely beautifully. In the Sicilian, you know, one of the wonderful things about playing the Sicilian is this central pawn majority. This comes into the game so often. Regular viewers of mine will know that I'm always riffing on this theme. That's one of the reasons I love playing the Sicilian. Often in the middle game and end game, that central pawn majority comes good for black. So Karjakin took this knight. Bishop d4, he's trying to drum up some activity, trying to spin this knight into the game to, you know, create complications, but d6 and e5, and now the central pawns start to roll and that king is completely safe. Excellent move, bishop e6, making room for the pawns and hitting the pawn on g4. Doesn't matter about the b pawn. The only important thing here is rolling the central pawns. Queen came back to h1 because e3 was threatened, so just keeping an eye on that, so e3 prevented. However, rook c8, excellent move, taking away the c6 square from the knight. And indeed a5 is threatened, pushing that knight. So Karjakin took the pawn on a6, but so what? Queen a5, excellent move, hitting the knight. Only way to stop the knight being taken is queen h5, check. So black has basically forced an exchange of queens, and now it's just a question of rolling these guys home. So threat e3, and after rook e1, bishop c4, hitting the knight. Knight has to move, and rook e8. Very simple, behind the passed pawn, threat e3, and if bishop e3, we exchange off, and f2, boom! Rook e3, well, that's a bit desperate, isn't it? But the pawns had to be blockaded. So Fabiano, with this move, taking the rook, reaches the time control, so no more time pressure. And now, well, there are many ways to win, but all we need to do is bring the rook into the game. And Caruana found a very elegant way to do that with rook e5, hitting the h-pawn. g4 came to defend, and now the rook comes anyway. Rook g5, and here Karjakin resigned because if bishop takes rook, the pawn goes through, and otherwise rook takes pawn and rook down, and end of game. So, I mean, I thought that was a really convincing victory by Caruana. Excellent preparation, and he steered his way through the complications very cleverly. And once again, I would highlight this move, bishop d5, not an obvious move, that proved to be so important in just gluing his position together. Well, as the soccer commentators say, when a game is kind of 0-0 and the two teams are playing very cautiously, afraid to make a mistake, they always say, what this game needs is a goal. And what this tournament needed was a decisive game, and in round 4 we had it. So I'm hoping now that will just kind of break the tension in the tournament, and we'll see some more decisive games.